Hello, this is Little Green Ghouls, and welcome back to Goosebumps Revisited, a series where I break down a classic Goosebumps book and the episode that goes along with it. I will also be telling notes about Goosebumps cliches and classic moments. This week, I'm excited to visit Night of the Living Dummy 2. If you're looking for any closure or sense of continuity from the first book, you're in for a disappointment. That being said, this book is still pretty fun and the best sequel so far, even if the last few chapters leave a lot to be desired. There's still quite a bit of Slappy action, although I don't think he's nearly as intense as Mr. Wood was, which kind of surprised me. It's definitely worth checking out if you haven't yet. Also, we're at the official halfway point for this series. Thank you so much to everybody who's been following along. I think it's crazy that I'm already halfway done with this little adventure. If you've been liking these videos, make sure you're subscribed and maybe share some of my videos where people might be interested. It helps more than you think. Night of the Living Dummy 2 has a decent enough cover in my opinion. I think the original is much creepier, while this one leans further into the cartoony side. I love that it's watermelon pink and green, and the expressions on the stuffed animals. We're looking at Slappy like, what the fuck, help us? Slappy looks mean as ever, but I enjoyed the close-up we got of his face last time a bit more. The 2004 slime border I think is an improvement in this case. They've darkened the image a bit and got rid of some of that excess sparkle that was all over the bedposts. I think bordering the image more around Slappy helps raise the creepy factor by making him look less tiny, and I just think these colors all work really well together. The 2015 version definitely makes Slappy look meaner, and the various smears of red paint makes you look twice for sure. Despite this, I don't really care for Slappy's face, and I just enjoy the overall style of the original more, but I think this one is one of the stronger remake covers from the later 2000s. I was expecting a lot of merchandise because it's Slappy, so I was really surprised to see that we only have a handful of things, including this usual school notebook. We also have this Night of the Living Dummy 2 scrapbook, and I wish we could see more of what actually was inside of this thing. While researching, I found out that Night of the Living Dummy 2 was adapted into a comic strip during the 90s by a UK newspaper named The Fun Day Times, with artwork done by John Erasmus. I wish we got more comic book style media with Goosebumps because it fits the medium well. Our front tag says, he's still walking, he's still stalking, in case you weren't already aware this is a sequel. The back tag says, you can't teach an old dummy new tricks, which of course is a play on you can't teach an old dog new tricks. You also can't teach Stein new plot points for his sequels either apparently. Okay, now let's read this blurb on the back. Amy's ventriloquist dummy Dennis keeps losing his head, for real, so Amy begs her family for a new dummy. That's when her dad finds Slappy in a local pawn shop. Slappy's kinda ugly, but Amy's having fun practicing her new routine. Then horrible things start happening. Horrible, nasty things. Just like what happened the first time. Because there's something odd about Slappy. Something not quite right. Something evil. Okay, now on to the summary. The book opens with our introduction to Amy Kramer and her weirdly wholesome family tradition, family sharing night. It's basically show and tell in elementary school, where every Thursday night the family gathers in the living room and they each have to share something. The standards are low though, because last week Amy's younger brother Jed shared a burp. Amy is the middle child, and she never feels like she has anything to share because she's not a talented artist like her older sister Sarah, nor is she a shameless clown like Jed. Amy identifies more with the family cat George and would like to be excluded from this narrative. Amy runs through some of her latest shares, which include her seashell collection and her collection of reggae CDs, which her family is not into. She usually resorts to telling adventure stories on family sharing night, but she is aware that she lacks any real talent, and her family is just trying to boost her self-esteem. Tonight, Jed is up first, and we have to stop and comment on how massive his baggy jeans are, because we are solidly in the mid-90s at this point. Anyways, Jed's family shares that he learned to whistle, which I can't knock on because I still can't whistle, and I have tried all my life. Amy is up next, and she pulls up Dennis, her trusty ventriloquist dummy, much to Sarah and Jed's dismay. I don't think I could handle growing up with weekly ventriloquist shows either. Poor Dennis is looking rough, with a tattered sweater and a face so faded one of his eyes is completely white, which kinda sounds terrifying. We are then treated to the following show. How are you tonight, Dennis? I asked. Not too well. Really, Dennis? What's wrong? I think I caught a bug. You mean you have the flu? I asked him. No, termites. Mom and Dad laughed. Sarah smiled. Jed groaned loudly. I turned back to Dennis. Well, have you been to a doctor? I asked him. No, a carpenter. Mom and Dad smiled at that one, but didn't laugh. Jed groaned again. Sarah stuck her finger down her throat pretending to puke. This delightful show comes to an abrupt end though, because Dennis goes to nod his head, and it instead pops off and rolls across the floor, which gets an actual laugh out of the family. Amy laments that she needs a new dummy, but her dad says he's had no luck finding an affordable one at the store. This is pre-Amazon, so I don't even know where you go to get a ventriloquist dummy. It feels like a very specialty item. They move on to Sarah's family share, which is a new watercolor of a cabin they stayed at in Maine. It's still wet though, so they all march to her room to view the latest masterpiece. I guess Sarah is supposed to be a genuinely talented artist, and even has some of her paintings featured at a local art museum. They turn the corner and Amy lets out a horrified scream in a chapter cliffhanger. Amy must be a die-hard supporter of her sister, because this scream is the result of seeing a smiley face doodled on the watercolor. Jed burst into laughter because he defaced the painting as a joke. I would be livid if I was Sarah. At first, I thought the parents weren't going to go after this kid like they should, because they start with, you know you're not allowed in your sister's room, first addressing the actual vandalism, but they get there eventually. The dad tells Jed he doesn't need to feel inadequate and jealous of his older sister, because they're all talented in this family. Jed goes right for the jugular and demands to know what the dad's supposed talent is, which clearly gets to this man, and he replies, "My talent is Chinese cooking." This family is full of artists, and he considers himself master of the wok. The scene ends with Jed getting grounded from video games for a week. Sarah doesn't think this is enough, but is told to mind her business by their mom. Amy sympathizes with her sister, up until Sarah starts complaining how her work of art has been destroyed. Amy thinks her sister is pretentious and should just call it a painting. She leaves to go chat with her friend Margot on the phone about the night's events, and then she has her favorite late night snack, Frosted Flakes. I want to know if Stein has some sort of partnership with Tony the Tiger, because this is the only cereal that exists in the Goosebumps universe. She heads to bed and is awoken halfway through the night by flapping curtains, and in a chapter cliffhanger she sees an ugly grinning face staring at her in the window. This scares the shit out of her until she realizes it's just Dennis. She then hears muffled laughter from the hallway and discovers Jed has just set the whole thing up. Jed is going to be in a world of hurt when Slappy arrives on the scene and everyone thinks Jed's the one fucking shit up. Amy gets her revenge here though because she proceeds to give him an atomic wedgie by pulling his pajama pants up to his chin, which makes him squeal with pain. We hop to the next day and Amy's friend Margot is over to visit. Margot is described as a mini person because she's a foot shorter than Amy. Margot is also super into the Beatles because Stein won't let the Goosebumps children enjoy modern 90s music, even though they're living in an awesome decade for music. Margot informs Amy that she has a job lined up for her, which involves performing at birthday parties for 3 and 4-year-olds with Dennis. Amy has to reject the job offer though because Dennis's head won't stop falling off. I wonder if Amy will have dreams of being on Star Search with her ventriloquist act, like Lindy from the original. Margot leaves and Amy's dad enters the scene with a surprise gift, which is of course Slappy. I lifted him carefully out of the carton. The dummy had wavy brown hair painted on the top of his wooden head. I studied his face. It was kinda strange, kind of intense. His eyes were bright blue, not faded like Dennis's. He had bright red lips painted into an eerie smile. His lower lip had a chip on one side, so it didn't quite match the other lip. As I pulled him from the box, the dummy appeared to stare into my eyes. The eyes sparkled. The grin grew wider. I felt a sudden chill. Why did this dummy seem to be laughing at me, I wondered. The dad remarks that the pawn shop owner practically gave Slappy away for free, so he was a great deal. That's really all we'll get to know about Slappy's past. Like, we'll never know how Lindy and Chris got rid of him and how he arrived at the pawn shop. Amy begins practicing how to operate Slappy's eyes, but is horrified in a chapter cliffhanger when she sticks her hand up inside his head and feels his warm little brain. This actually does end up being gross because Amy hands Slappy over to her dad to investigate, and he pulls out a moldy old sandwich that's been left up there for months apparently. Now I really want to know what happened with Lindy and Chris. Did they defeat Slappy via sandwich somehow? Also, this just unlocked a memory for me from childhood when a friend of mine got an M&M dispenser from a garage sale or something, or maybe he just found it, but when he got it home it was full of maggots. Together, Amy and her dad proceed to strip search Slappy for any more surprises and are pleased when it appears the sandwich was the only gross thing. Thankfully, they do plan to spray some disinfectant up in Slappy's head because I can't imagine just removing the rotten sandwich was enough to stop him from stinking. Well, I guess I spoke too soon. Amy notices a yellow slip in Slappy's pocket and reads, "Karu Marie Odana Lomana Molano Karanu" out loud. If you recall from the last book, these magic words are trouble and brought Mr. Wood to life, which again begs the question, what happened to Slappy after the previous book? Why would Chris and Lindy put the curse words back on Slappy before disposing him at the pawn shop? Anyways, Slappy's lips twitch and he winks at Amy after the magic words are spoken, which startles her in a chapter cliffhanger. The dad offers to grab a screwdriver to see if he can tighten Slappy's eyes, because he thinks he just must be loose, but Slappy bitch slaps him in response. The dad accuses Amy of doing it somehow, which makes no sense because she wasn't even close enough to operate Slappy, but Slappy got the dad good because he has a bright red mark across his cheek from where Slappy slapped him. They continue to polish Slappy up, and Amy races to the phone to tell Margot the good news. She can actually perform at these birthday parties. She just needs to learn some new jokes fast to flesh out a full act. Amy checks out some books from the library and practices with Slappy until she feels ready to show off at family sharing night. Towards the end of dinner before sharing time, Amy is startled to see Dennis crawling across the floor like a little monster. That is until she hears Jed's muffled laughter, because once again he's causing trouble. She's also extra pissed because the whole family finds this hysterical and can't believe it actually scared her. Family Share Night opens with the mom sharing a work story about a fat woman who came in and tried on only tiny clothing and ripped every single piece, then bought them all for her sister. Do you get it? It's funny because fat people are funny. It's 1995. The dad then busts out his guitar and starts singing Maggie's Farm by Bob Dylan. These poor children. It's then Amy's turn and she begins her act to the groans of her siblings. Slappy doesn't wait long though before diving right into his brain of insult comedy. "Knock knock," I said. "Knock it off," came a harsh reply. Slappy spun around to face my mom. "Hey, don't break the sofa, fatso," he rasped. "Why don't you skip to french fries and have a salad once in a while?" "Huh?" my mom gasped in shock. Amy, that's not funny," Dad cried angrily. "What's your problem, Baldy?" Slappy shouted. "Is that your head, or are you hatching an ostrich egg on your neck?" "That's enough, Amy," Dad cried, jumping to his feet. "Stop it right now." But Dad," I sputtered. "Why don't you put an extra hole in your head and use it for a bowling ball?" Slappy screamed. The mom declares these jokes are hurtful and insulting, to which Slappy closes the chapter with, "Did I mention y'all are ugly?" Slappy isn't particularly clever, but I admire the chaos he's causing. Amy is freaked out and is trying to explain that she didn't say any of that, but does wonder maybe if it was a subconscious thing. Her dad is also so mad that his chest is literally covered in sweat suddenly. He sends Amy to her room and declares family sharing night is over. She heads to her room defeated and glares at Slappy by wondering what the fuck just happened before going to bed. The next day she gets her report card and is not pleased to see that she's gotten 2 C's, while Sarah has straight A's. She has a great plan though that involves telling her parents that Miss Carson didn't actually have time to grade anything and just gave everybody C's to be fair, which sounds logical to me. While pacing her room, Amy thinks Slappy's eyes are tracking her, so she turns him around just in case. On Saturday, Amy is grounded and can't visit Margot until she finishes her science project, but she's feeling extra motivated because she has a birthday next weekend to perform at, with a dozen 3-year-olds as her audience. She decides to go all out on this project and heads up to Sarah's room to borrow some fancy markers. Later that day, Sarah returns from the mall and begins shrieking when she enters her room. It turns out someone, aka Slappy, has dumped dozens of jars of paint all over Sarah's room and destroyed the carpet. They call Jed in to accuse him of destroying her room when he turns the tables on Amy and declares he saw her in the room earlier. She tries to explain that she was just borrowing markers, but nobody believes her. She leaves the room in tears, and once back in her bedroom, she notices paint splatter on Slappy's shoes. This leaves her even more confused, but she hasn't quite realized Slappy's alive just yet. They all sit down for a family conversation about what to do with Amy, and when she mentions the paint on Slappy's shoes, the conversation kind of veers towards getting Amy a psychiatrist. Amy ends up grounded for 2 weeks, no mall, no friends, no movies, but she can still perform at the birthday party. We hop to the party, and Amy's incredibly nervous since this is her first real show, and there's a fairly large crowd of a dozen toddlers and their parents. Amy meets Alicia, the birthday girl, and introduces her to Slappy, which quickly goes horribly wrong. Amy has Slappy shake Alicia's hand, but Slappy decides he doesn't want to let go. Slappy starts squeezing harder and harder till the little 3-year-old starts screaming that it hurts. A crowd forms and Alicia's mom begins to panic as she tries to get Slappy to let go. Slappy then lets out a long, evil cackle and a chapter cliffhanger. We cut to later and Amy is racing home from the party in tears. Apparently Slappy eventually let go, but at that point all the 3-year-olds were screaming and crying, and Alicia's mom said she was going to sue Margot's dad. Once at home she tells her mom and sister everything, and they are concerned for her mental health more than anything else. It's suggested that Amy leaves Slappy in the closet for a bit, which she supports because she never wants to see Slappy ever again at this point. Margot calls, and surprisingly her dad wants to give Amy another chance, maybe with some older kids, but Amy lets her know that her ventriloquist days are over. She heads to bed and falls quickly asleep, feeling safer now that Slappy is locked up in the closet. The next morning she awakens to Sarah's screams. The whole family races to Sarah's room and discovers her walls are covered in Amy in bright red paint. The parents aren't full on mad, more like concerned because they think Amy has gone nuts. She tries to explain that it was Slappy, and when she opens her closet door, Slappy is sitting there with a paintbrush in his hand. Amy thinks this is pretty damning evidence, but the family just thinks she positioned Slappy with a paintbrush. The parents send Sarah and Jed down to the kitchen so they can interrogate Amy further, but she continues to insist it was Slappy. The parents defeatedly head into the kitchen when Amy turns to Slappy and begins shaking and screaming at him. As a result, he turns to her and lets out a evil hee like a Furby. We then jump to Amy on the phone with Margot. Amy doesn't want to tell Margot over the phone what's happening because she doesn't want her best friend to think she's crazy too. She also lets her know that she's 100% officially done with ventriloquism, so to stop asking if she can perform at birthday parties. Amy then has to hop off the phone quickly because she's grounded and shouldn't be on it. Amy is locked in her room until she confesses, but she's stubborn enough to hold out. She stares out her bedroom window, a prisoner, and watches as Jed and his friends rollerblade like all cool 90s children do. She decides she'll stay up all night as long as it takes in order to catch Slappy in the act. She goes to bed early, after an awkward dinner with her family, where no one speaks to her and they just stare at her like she's a zoo animal. She's determined to stay up all night, but within 2 sentences she's fallen asleep. Amy then wakes up in a chapter cliffhanger to shuffling feet in her bedroom. This ends up just being Jed, who claims he woke up to Amy calling him. She points out that this is not possible since he literally just woke her up. He decides he must have been dreaming, and then Amy becomes suspicious that maybe Jed has been using Slappy to frame her all this time. She decides to believe him and sends Jed back to bed. She also tells George the cat to go to bed too for good measure. She's much more alert now and lays awake waiting for Slappy to make his move. This is short-lived though because she falls right back asleep. Amy would not last long if she were dealing with Freddy Krueger. She wakes up again, and this time to the sound of a click, and sees the closet door slowly open and a shadowy figure sneak across the room. If this were happening in real life, I'd be losing my shit because this is actually kind of creepy. Amy doesn't have much of a plan, it turns out, other than just to follow Slappy as he destroys something else. At least the other Goosebumps kids at least busted out the Polaroids for this kind of occasion. She follows him until she's outside of Sarah's room, when suddenly Slappy turns around. Amy dives into the bathroom and waits to be attacked, but when nothing happens, she peeks around the corner and sees that Slappy has presumably gone into Sarah's room. She looks into the room and sees Slappy preparing to graffiti Sarah's latest piece of art. Amy dives into the room and tackles Slappy before he can start painting. Slappy tries to punch her, but suddenly Sarah's awake and Slappy goes limp. The entire family arrives on the scene and sees Amy holding Slappy, and they just assume she's extra crazy and having Slappy act out all the destruction. The next morning, Amy finds her mom on the phone with Dr. Palmer's secretary because she's making an appointment for Amy with a psychiatrist. At school, Amy has a tense conversation with Margot, but isn't about to tell her about Slappy because she doesn't want the whole school to think she's crazy. That night, she's once again in her room pacing and trying to figure out what to do with Slappy. She settles on just throwing him in the trash, but before she gets the opportunity, the closet door opens and Slappy declares, "Amy, this time you and I had a little talk," in a chapter cliffhanger. The next chapter opens with what appears to be Slappy's unfortunate catchphrase, "You are now my slave." Slappy loves calling people his slaves. He even did it in the Goosebumps live show in Disney World.
Hey, wait a minute, what do you think you're doing?
I am going to make all these people my slaves!
What? Oh, no, you're not! Stop right there, puppet boy! This is my show! I'm in charge here!
It's my show now!
It's not your show!
You look like you'll be a good slave. It's time to practice how to tremble in fear.
Who did Slappy?
He lets Amy know she will now serve him and do everything he asks. He then throws in slave a few more times for good measure. "You're my slave now. You're my slave forever." Amy is like, "Why the fuck would I agree to be your slave?" And he lets her know he'll keep destroying things in the house until her parents have had enough and send her away, and then she'll only get to see them on visiting days. Amy decides enough of this shit and whips Slappy to the ground in an attempt to pin him. She reassures herself that she can take him because he's just a dummy, but while trying to pin him, Slappy punches her square in the forehead, which drops her to her knees in pain. She regains her composure and finally gets Slappy pinned to the floor, where he keeps screaming slave at her in different ways. She gets him inside the closet and locks the door. This only provides temporary relief though, because he starts attacking the door so hard that she thinks he's going to break it down. Amy races out of her room looking for help and decides to go to Sarah. She tells Sarah about Slappy, and to her surprise, her sister responds with just a, "Yes, I know," because apparently Sarah had seen Slappy paint her walls, but was too afraid to acknowledge that it was true. It also turns out that Sarah is jealous of Amy for being so cool and relaxed, and didn't mind when Amy was getting blamed for Slappy's destruction as a result of this jealousy. Amy decides to ignore this bullshit and asks Sarah to help her dispose of Slappy. They race into Amy's room just in time to see Slappy kick down the door and shout, "Guess what, slaves? Slappy wins." The two sisters jump into action, and once again they get Slappy pinned to the ground. This time though, they tie his arms and legs into knots, with his own arms and legs. They also stuff some tissues into his mouth so they have to keep hearing about slaves. Throughout all this commotion, it's 11 o'clock at night, and their parents still haven't woken up, despite a strange man's voice shouting how he's going to turn their daughters into slaves and knocking them around the room. The girls settle on dragging Slappy outside, but they don't have much of a plan past that. They walk down the block, and at first the best they can come up with is just stuffing him in a random trash can and hoping he gets picked up tomorrow. However, right before sticking him in, Amy has a slightly better idea and suggests stuffing him down into a sewer. They force him on in, hear a splash, then silence, and then they head home feeling victorious. Shockingly, the next morning, they head downstairs and see Slappy seated at the kitchen table with Jed having some frosted flakes. This is basically beat for beat what happened in the original book. I feel like Stein could have spiced it up a bit more or something. The mom forces Amy to take Slappy up into her room, and while walking, he whispers, "Good morning, slave. Did you sleep well?" Amy chucks him back into the closet for like the 4th time, and then heads off to school. 1, why did Slappy just go into the closet willingly this time? And 2, she's just gonna go to school like there isn't an evil dummy in her house currently? What? She's unable to focus at school that day because, no shit she's not, and vows not to be Slappy's slave. We then jump to that night, and Slappy is still in her closet, and she's just in bed like, "I've tried nothing, and I'm all out of ideas." Slappy then proceeds to open the closet door and stroll on down the hall with Amy in pursuit. Slappy heads back to Sarah's room, and before Amy can do anything, a small figure pops out of the darkness shouting, "Stand back!" The light flicks on, and then Dennis is standing there. Dennis then proceeds to lower his head and headbutt Slappy right in the gut. This headbutt causes Slappy to stumble backwards into Sarah's iron bedpost, and his head cracks right down the middle. Then a big fat white worm wiggles out from the broken pieces and slithers to the wall where it disappears into a crack in the molding. I was very confused by this sudden evil worm appearance, and no, there will be no further explanation provided by Stein. The parents then spring out of the closet and are like, "We saw the whole thing. Sarah convinced us to hide in the closet and watch her daughter almost get taken out by a dummy while we did nothing, but we watched the whole thing and now we believe you. Hooray!" Amy then lets the reader know that this was actually the plan the whole time. She and Sarah had to convince the parents to hide in the closet, and she purposely let her closet door unlocked so Slappy could get out easier. Jed then dressed up as Dennis to shock Slappy, and then we saw how it all played out. I guess this makes it slightly less stupid, but not really. It's the last page though, so we have to have one last twist. It turns out Jed slept in, so he never actually dressed up as Dennis, leaving the family wondering what to do about Dennis, and that's how this one ends. This is like the same ending as the original, except less exciting because there were no deaths via steamroller. Also, Slappy called Amy his slave 11 times in case you were curious. We have a direct episode pairing this week with the confusingly titled Night of the Living Dummy Part 2, which doesn't have a Part 1. Our novel actor is going to be Katrina Scarzone, who played Sarah. Katrina's gone on to be in various TV shows, but most notably is easily Grey's Anatomy as Dr. Joe Wilson in 193 episodes. Get that money, Katrina. Let's start the episode. Jed goes full on stalker for his family share.
There's Mom sticking to her diet again. Guess whose new sweater Amy's trying?
You little geek!
And Dad's getting his hair just right.
Dennis looks less ugly than I was expecting.
You bothered by any ants?
No, worse, termites. You've heard of the Terminator. Well, we had to call it the X-Terminator.
Slappy is an icon, and he freaked me out as a kid.
Oh, wow, he's great. Slappy?
Slappy has your back, Amy. Appreciate it.
Now go to bed. Don't have to.
Yeah, we don't have to.
Slappy wants to be an only child.
Look, Dennis, here's your new friend Slappy.
Slappy was just expressing himself. Slappy just killed a man.
How did this get here?
I couldn't handle being in this family. I'd prefer Maggie's farm to this, though.
And if you're happy, clap your hands.
Slappy is just stating facts.
Laugh, you're such a booger brain, you tried to grow an eggplant by burying a chicken.
Hey, cut it out!
That was your dad? Well, what a relief. I thought the cat got stuck in the dishwasher. You call yourself an artist? Why don't you give up brushes and try using a roller?
Is this supposed to be funny? No!
Slappy's such a mean-looking little man.
What are you? Talk to me!
I'm also just now noticing that the mom has a baton and pom-poms, and I feel like we were robbed of a great performance. Slappy shows no mercy.
Hi, Slappy. My name's Alicia. Alicia, don't touch that! He's funny. Ow! Hey! He won't let me go! Let me go right now! What in the world?
Uh-oh.
This is when you just leave the house.
This can't be happening.
Slappy's just trying to save this family from the father's music. He's being helpful.
Oh, Amy, how could you?
I enjoy that the sewer solution made it to the episode.
Hey, kid, wait, come on!
Slappy had to have incredibly muddy feet to leave a trail this clear. Slappy's slave obsession also makes an appearance.
Amy. Guess who?
Keep away from me.
They'll lock you up. Maybe they'll let you see them while visiting. Inseparable. You are my slave.
No, I'm not gonna be your slave. You can't make me.
I like when Slappy decides just to drop the act.
You can run, but you cannot hide.
This episode just feels a lot more fun than the book did. I wanted Slappy to drop down on their heads in a surprise attack.
I've seen better swings on playgrounds.
There's the green gas I was expecting, not a worm. Dennis sounds a lot like Goofy.
It's good to be back in the family again.
Overall, I thought Night of the Living Dummy 2 was a pretty solid book. It's easily one of the better Goosebumps sequels, but that's not really saying much because the sequels are usually shit. I enjoyed Amy as a protagonist and thought she was pretty likable throughout the story. I just wish Stein had done more with Slappy, other than continuously play with paint. I wanted more of the birthday party stuff where he's attacking toddlers. I also felt it shared too many plot points from the first book in a bad way. I just think there's so much to do with an evil doll, and we didn't really see anything particularly creative. I'm still going to give this one 4 to 5 Frosted Flakes. This book was fun, but it did leave me wanting more from it. Okay, on to our totals. Night of the Living Dummy 2 didn't have any vomit, asshole victims, shoulder scares, or It Was Only a Dreams, but it did have some 90s moments. In Getting Jake with the 90s, we had 3 90s moments. These included super baggy jeans, Nintendo, and rollerblading. This raises our total to 115 jiggy 90s moments. In It's a Prank Bro, I counted 3 pranks. We had Jed as our primary prankster, where he paints Sarah's watercolor, puts Dennis in the window at night, and pretends to be Dennis come to life at dinner. This raises our series total to 64 It's a Prank Bros. Night of the Living Dummy 2 had quite a few chapter cliffhangers, with a total of 13, and I thought they were pretty strong throughout. This raises our Goosebumps total to 378. I don't have a clunky cliffhanger award for this book because I thought these were pretty solid throughout, and I didn't have any that really made me roll my eyes or anything like that. Shocker ending. Our big twist for this one was surprise, Jed wasn't dressed as Dennis, Dennis was dressed as Dennis. So we have 2 living dummies, just like in the original. This raises our Goosebumps total to 25. Well, that's it for Night of the Living Dummy 2. I liked this book well enough, but in a lot of ways I preferred the original with Mr. Wood, which kind of surprised me. I thought Mr. Wood sliming the audience alone was better than anything in this story. Next week is The Barking Ghost, which I know Stein himself isn't very fond of, so we'll see how that goes. Let me know in the comments what you thought of Night of the Living Dummy 2. Which did you prefer, the original or the sequel? Who do you think would win in a cage match, Slappy, Mr. Wood, or Dennis? Also, what did you think of my evil toy clips this week? Anyways, as always, thanks again for watching, and make sure you subscribe for
the pride, the love,